Hi, I'm Isabel Tom, and I am an author, speaker, and educator. I wrote a book called The Value of Wrinkles, a young perspective on how loving the old will change your life. One neat thing about this book is it has my mama on the cover and my yaya on the back and my kids and my husband. From the time that I was born all the way up until actually, I think when I was 26, got married, I have lived under the same roof as my grandparents. Growing up, I always knew there was a difference and I couldn't really put a finger on it, but I think definitely part of it was just the whole concept of family, because when I thought of family, family included my mama, yaya, my parents, and my sisters, and it was a bigger group of people, whereas I noticed Western culture is more focused on just like the nuclear family, just the parents and their kids. I grew up living with my mama and yaya and my parents, and mama and yaya, they spoke Cantonese, but yaya, he could speak English as well, but I only ever spoke to them in Cantonese. But one of the things as I got older, I really felt like I couldn't have as deep conversations with them. My vocabulary was like ni sek jiao fan mea, and then I could be like sek jiao la, and I basically knew the foods and I could just have very basic conversation. In college, I decided to study abroad in Hong Kong, and the main reason I did that was because I wanted to improve my Chinese, and I think it was really cool because I could start having deeper conversations with them and using other terms with them. Because I studied abroad and expanded my vocabulary, as they were getting older, they needed more support with doctor's appointments or taking them places, and so I was able to actually communicate things that the doctor might be saying, or if they went to the hospital, I could communicate with them. My first job out of college was at a retirement community, and I was, like many new college grads, I was just trying to look for a job. And so I had studied business and I thought, for sure I'm gonna change to a different line of work, but this will be good for now. When I started, within the first week, my eyes were just open to just learning about aging. I had met so many other older adults, and I came to understand my grandparents a little bit more, even within that first week. Throughout the years, I was blogging about aging, and then about 15 years after I started in the senior care space, in the senior care industry, my grandma passed away in 2018. When my grandma passed away, she was the last living grandparent that I had. I realized that caregiving was a huge part of my life, and that God had blessed me with over 35 years of experience, either living, serving, or working professionally with older adults. A lot of times older adults don't have a voice. As they get older and they decline, they are weaker. They don't have as much time to dedicate to getting the word out about something or even helping other people understand how they're feeling. So I realized that I need to use the youth that God gave me, and the breath and the life and the ability to write and speak, to help be a voice for other older adults out there. So I joined a writing club. In the writing club, they taught you how to pitch a book idea. And that's when I really felt convicted to write a book proposal. And I thought maybe this could be something that I could pitch as a book idea. So that's kind of the path that I went. And all along the way, I really felt God putting different pieces in my way to remind me, I think I'm opening this door for you. So keep going, keep writing. And then in December, maybe 6-7 months after I had pitched the book idea, I got an email from the publisher and they offered me a contract. And it was just really a blessing to be able to share my experience growing up, and also just what God has taught me throughout the years. My dad, who was a pastor, he had cancer and passed away in 2015. And before he passed, when he was battling cancer, one of the things he often said is that he wanted to live longer so he could write. One of the things he wanted to write about, if he had more time, was about honoring the elderly, because he was actually the eldest son who decided to intentionally care for his aging parents. Being able to write and then also have the opportunity to publish a book really shows me that, God heard my dad's prayers, and even though he didn't accomplish publishing another book for my dad, he gave me the opportunity to write the stories and lessons, a lot of the lessons that my dad wanted to be able to share. My book is really, it encompasses my dad's story too. I think growing up, I often wondered like why I had to grow up living in the same house as my grandparents, because my friends weren't in that same situation where they had their grandparents living with them, or at least they weren't talking about it. And even growing up, I think I often felt forgotten sometimes, because as an Asian American, I didn't meet to the standards that the Asian culture has in terms of, you know, succeeding academically. So I often felt like, God, have you forgotten me? Like, do you have a purpose for my life? What am I doing? I realized that, you know, God had not forgotten me at all. There was a reason that he had me as a grandchild living with my grandparents for such a long time. It was 26 years, which felt so long. But if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have this story, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity to understand what it felt like to decline and just understand a lot of the struggles that older adults deal with. At least my grandparents dealt with. And I realized that God had his hand in it the whole time. When I first got the opportunity to write this book, I actually wasn't thinking about my Asian American identity at all until I started realizing that there are very few Asian American authors out there in general, an Asian American woman. And so I think it's really been neat to realize that I have a platform and I have the opportunity to influence other Asian American younger women out there to use the gifts that God has given them, with the creative gifts especially. I think one of the really neat things for me too is that, you know, my daughter has started to write a lot more, because I think she's seeing the example that there are Asian American women out there who, you know, they speak and they write and they make a difference in this world. So my Chinese name is Do Zhuga, and my parents picked it intentionally because it means singing praises to the Lord. So when I had the opportunity to publish this book, I had to submit my name, and I really did want to submit my full name, which included my Chinese name in the middle. But one of the reasons why I didn't end up choosing to include my name is because, as I was discussing with friends and different people, I think the realization that I had is that less people would read it if they realized that I was Chinese, and that it wouldn't necessarily draw them in, but that it might turn them away from reading the book because I had a Chinese name and they may not be able to relate with that. So in the end, I ended up using just Isabel Tom, but still deep inside, I kind of wish I also used my Chinese name just to honor my Asian heritage, my Chinese heritage, and honor my parents, and give glory to God. As an Asian, I don't think I've been encouraged to share my story, because I think I often thought it didn't matter, like that I just need to work past it. So, you know, when you have felt like you were discriminated against or treated less because you weren't like everybody else, in many cases, I don't think people are trying to like isolate Asian Americans, but I think sometimes they just don't understand because they've never heard our story. So I think it's really important to help people to see kind of the dynamics that come from growing up as an Asian American. When it comes to caring for the older generation, like caring for the elderly, that is one thing that I think Asian culture is known for. But I think something else that I have noticed as well is that sometimes it's done out of obligation, so the heart is not really there. So I think as a Christian, though, we have the opportunity to care for our elders, but not simply out of obligation, but to do it in a way that is truly respectful, caring, and honoring to, you know, the older adults in our lives.
You have found the Value of Wrinkles podcast with Isabel Tom. Yep, that's me.
I host the Value of Wrinkles podcast, and I really use that as a way to be able to share the stories of older adults, to remind people that every single older person has a story. And so I've been able to interview a lot of different older people who have completely different stories. It's an honor for me to be able to show other people that as someone ages, they're just like you and I. One of the biggest ways that we as Asian Americans can actually bless our grandparents, our parents, is actually to listen to their stories and have a listening ear to what they've gone through. Because for a lot of our parents, I think, especially if they're immigrants, they've gone through a lot and maybe they haven't shared that story. And I think there's often a lot of trauma that they've actually experienced. When I give my older loved ones the opportunity to share their story, you start to understand them more, you start to understand what they've gone through, but I think it's also very freeing and helpful to them to just be able to share it with somebody and not have to hold in all of that hard and heavy stuff on their own. That is like mental health for the Asian American elder, just to listen to their story. So I tell people, like, when you ask them, you honor them. One of my focuses this year actually is to provide more resources and develop resources for Asian Americans who are caring for their older loved ones, for grandparents and parents. One of the things that often bothered me is that the resources out there, the services out there, often don't meet the needs of like an Asian American family who's caring for their loved one. And it is very different, right? It's very different, everything from the foods that you eat to the way that you need to communicate with a physician or healthcare professionals. I mean, language is a barrier, but there's a cultural side to that as well that I think is often missed by the healthcare industry. I recently created a digital course, and I am also starting to share it with churches so that churches can provide resources to the caregivers within their congregation and to the community, because I think there are a ton of people who are caring for either their aging parents or grandparents, and they often don't know what to do. They don't have support. And so I want churches to be able to be that place where people can turn to for that support. I have come to see in serving older adults that even as someone ages, even as someone declines, even as somebody is, days away from the end of their life, that they still have value, and there's so much that we can learn from them.